Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, October 24th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The CIA backs Ukraine's attacks inside Russia. So, first top story in a while that's not related to the Gaza war. And this is based on a report published by the Washington Post on Monday, what I think is a bombshell report that has not gotten much attention. So this report revealed how the CIA has supported covert Ukrainian attacks inside Russia, including the killing of Daria Dugina, who's the daughter of Alexander Dugin, who is a prominent Russian philosopher. So this report said that the killing of Dugina was carried out by the Security Service of Ukraine, that's the SBU, and that it was one of many operations inside Russian territory involving special units that the CIA helped form in the wake of the 2014 coup in Kiev that ousted former President Viktor Yanukovych. And that was when the U.S. cooperation with Ukraine really increased, both when it comes to training their military and this covert stuff, which we've known for a while that the CIA was involved in Ukraine. Following 2014, obviously, they had involvement in the country for a long time, but when things really ramped up, 2014 was that turning point. And I'll just read an excerpt from this report. It says, quote, "The missions have involved elite teams of Ukrainian operatives drawn from directorates that were formed, trained, and equipped in close partnership with the CIA. According to current and former Ukrainian and U.S. officials, since 2015, the CIA has spent tens of millions of dollars to transform Ukraine's Soviet-formed services into potent allies against Moscow," end quote. So tens of millions of dollars were spent on this effort, and the CIA support since 2015 has included advanced surveillance systems, training both inside Ukraine and inside the U.S., the building of new headquarters for Ukraine's military intelligence agency. Apparently they funded that. And just, general intelligence sharing that was thought unimaginable pre-2014. So officials told the Washington Post that the CIA still maintains a significant presence in Kiev to this day. And we do know from other reports that the CIA is on the ground in Ukraine, which of course is not a surprise. So the CIA helped the SBU form a new unit known as the 5th Directorate. Recruits for the new unit were trained by the CIA outside of Kiev with the purpose of forming groups capable of operating behind front lines and working as covert groups. The CIA also gave major support to Ukraine's military intelligence agency, known as the GUR. So listen to this quote from a former U.S. intelligence official who worked in Ukraine. He said, quote, "We calculated that GUR was a smaller and more nimble organization where we could have more impact. GUR was our little baby. We gave them all new equipment and training," end quote. And this is the military intelligence agency in Ukraine that is responsible for a lot of attacks inside Russia and takes credit for killing people inside Russia. And these are assassinations. And officials insisted to the Post that the CIA was not involved in the targeted killings carried out by Ukrainian intelligence, but they said the focus was on bolstering those services' abilities to gather intelligence on a dangerous adversary. The report said that the SBU and the GUR have been involved in dozens of assassinations against Russian officials in Russian-controlled Ukraine, alleged Ukrainian collaborators, and Russian officials and civilians deep inside Russia, like Dugina. And she was killed in a car bombing outside of Moscow in August 2022. This report said that her father was the real target, was the intended target. They thought they were going to leave an event that they were at together in the same car, so they thought they were going to take both of them out, but they just took out the daughter. So despite the fact that they are civilians, Dugin and his daughter, who's now dead, Ukrainian officials justify Dugina's killing because she was a supporter of Russia's war in Ukraine, telling the Washington Post that she was no innocent victim. One security official called her the daughter of the father of Russian propaganda. The official said that the car bombing and other operations inside Russia are about narrative and showing, so-called enemies of Ukraine that punishment is imminent, even for those who think they are untouchable. So this report said that the CIA has objected to some of the Ukrainian operations, but never withdrew support for these Ukrainian intelligence agencies. So what this report is saying, it's not that the CIA is directly involved in these killings, but that they are supporting the people doing it, and they haven't changed that support even after these assassinations. And there were other assassinations that happened inside the Donbass during the civil war that sparked after the 2014 coup. You had the separatists in the east declared the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, and that sparked a civil war. So there's a lot to this report. I would suggest if people really want to check out all the details, to go give it a read, because there's a lot going on here. And this is huge. And again, it just hasn't gotten much attention. I mean, we always try to put the shoe on the other foot. Could we imagine any scenario where a Russian-backed force was conducting, all these assassinations inside the U.S. or against people that supported American wars? That's the implication here, is that people that support their government's wars are legitimate targets of assassination. And there's been other assassinations. There was a former Russian submarine commander who was killed while jogging in the southern Russian city of Krasnodar. And there was a military blogger who was killed in a bombing at a cafe in St. Petersburg. And the SBU was also behind the two attacks on the Kerch Bridge, which connects Russia to the Crimean Peninsula. So this is another interesting tidbit here. So the first attack on the Crimean Bridge occurred in October 2022, and it was a truck bombing that killed 5 people. So according to this report, the driver of the truck was unaware that a bomb was planted inside his truck. He was not a suicide bomber. That wasn't really clear, but they're admitting that they killed this innocent guy who was just driving across the bridge as part of this operation. And the second attack on the Kerch Bridge involved naval drones that, according to the Washington Post, were developed as part of a top-secret operation involving the CIA and other Western intelligence services. So they're helping make these drones that Ukraine is using for these attacks. So I ended here with a quote from a former CIA official who compared the CIA-backed Ukrainian intelligence services to Israel's Mossad, which is known for being behind assassinations in Iran. This official said, quote, "We are seeing the birth of a set of intelligence services that are like Mossad in the 1970s. If Ukraine's intelligence operations become even bolder, targeting Russians in third countries, for example, you could imagine how that might cause rifts with partners and come into serious tension with Ukraine's broader strategic goals," end quote. So it's interesting that you have this official warning about that this could get out of control. I mean, it seems like it already has, and this could spread to other countries, what they created here. And you talk about blowback for U.S. support for this Ukraine war. So again, there's a lot to this. There's a lot I could also get into about why the Washington Post is publishing this now. I'll leave that up to you guys to talk about, because I already spent a lot of time on this story. But again, a very big story. And we suspected that the U.S. was involved in these attacks. And just the fact that they built up these Ukrainian intelligence services, which are now doing all this stuff inside Russia, it's hard to believe that we're not at war with, that at this point Russia hasn't said enough and attacked a NATO base or something. All right, anyway, now to get into the Gaza stuff. The next story here, the U.S. expects major escalations of attacks on U.S. troops. So a Pentagon official told reporters on Monday that the military is preparing for a significant escalation of attacks on U.S. troops stationed in the Middle East due to President Biden's support for Israel's onslaught in Gaza. So the comments came the same day that U.S. Central Command said its forces downed 2 drones that were fired at a base in Syria. So starting last week, there have been a series of attacks on bases housing U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, and they continued on Monday. So a senior Pentagon official told reporters, quote, "They've been under an increase of attacks for really the last 3 days or so at various locations," end quote. So a group that calls itself the Islamic Resistance in Iraq claimed that it launched drones at U.S. forces in Syria on Monday, but the U.S. has not attributed blame. The Pentagon official pointed the finger at Iran due to Tehran's support for Shia militias that operate in Syria and Iraq, although there's no indication that Iran is directly involved in these attacks. This official said, quote, "We see a prospect for a much more significant escalation against U.S. forces and personnel in the near term. And let's be clear about it, the road leads back to Iran. Iran-funded, armed, equipped, and trained militias and proxy forces all across the region," end quote. So it's concerning that they're pointing the finger at Iran because they're saying that they're going to respond to these things. And the implication is there that they might actually directly attack Iran. I doubt that we'll see that anytime soon, but we'll see how this thing escalates. So separately, Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Patrick Ryder said that there was no sign that Iran is ordering the attacks, but he said the U.S. still blames Iran. He said, quote, "We don't necessarily see that Iran has explicitly ordered them to take these kinds of attacks. That said, by virtue of the fact that they are supported by Iran, we will ultimately hold Iran responsible," end quote. So the escalation, I think, is expected once Israel launches its ground invasion of Gaza, which is not clear when that's going to happen. That the U.S. is expecting things to really heat up over there, and U.S. troops might start dying because the U.S. is supporting this Israeli war on Gaza. That's probably going to be the result if this thing continues, which there's no sign of the U.S. or Israel backing down here. So the next one, the U.S. sends military advisors to Israel, including a 3-star general. So the U.S. has sent military officers to Israel to serve as advisors amid preparations for an Israeli ground invasion of Gaza, demonstrating the deep U.S. involvement in Israel's war. So leading these officers is Lieutenant General James Glynn, a 3-star Marine Corps general who previously headed the Marine Special Operations and was involved in the U.S. war against ISIS in Iraq. So according to Axios, Glynn and other officers are not directing any operations, but they will provide advice about Israel's plans in Gaza with the primary focus on the coming invasion. The U.S. officers are sharing lessons they learned fighting ISIS in Mosul, Iraq, where a brutal 9-month battle took thousands of civilian lives. So the U.S. war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria was devastating for the civilians who lived in the ISIS-controlled territories. Last year, there was actually this big report from the New York Times called the Civilian Casualty Files that revealed all these reports of civilian casualties that the Pentagon kept secret, basically. According to an AP investigation from 2017, between 9,000 and 11,000 civilians died in the Battle of Mosul. About a third were killed by the U.S.-led coalition airstrikes or its Iraqi allies. A third were killed by ISIS, and the cause of death for the other third is undetermined. But that's a huge number of civilians who were killed. And since the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel, Israeli airstrikes have been relentlessly pounding the Gaza Strip. According to Gaza's health ministry, the latest numbers, at least 5,087 Palestinians have been killed, including 2,055 children. So really horrific stuff. And this is just over 2 weeks now that this has been going on. So Israel's invasion is expected to be focused on North Gaza, as the Israeli military has told the 1.1 million Palestinians living in the area to evacuate. And according to threatening leaflets dropped by the Israeli military, Palestinians who stay in the north will be considered terrorist accomplices. All right, so the next one here, the White House says that Israel will decide on Gaza's strategy. So White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said on Monday that Israel will decide on its Gaza strategy in response to media reports that said the U.S. was urging a delay to the ground invasion of Gaza. The New York Times reported that the U.S. advised delaying the ground offensive to buy time for hostage negotiations and to allow more humanitarian aid to enter the besieged Gaza Strip. The report said the U.S. also wanted more time to deploy additional military assets to the region, as attacks on U.S. forces are expected to increase once Israel invades Gaza. Israel's Army radio reported on Monday that Israel had decided to delay the invasion to allow more U.S. forces to deploy to the region, but that report has not been confirmed. U.S. and Israeli officials kind of were denying that idea. According to the Times of Israel, so Kirby said that Israel's political and military leaders will make the decision on their operations in Gaza and that the U.S. is only asking questions. A source told the Times of Israel that the U.S. does not intend to pressure Israel on its military strategy publicly, as is, very clear. So the Times of Israel also reported that the Israeli military is eager to launch its ground invasion of Gaza and is hoping the Israeli cabinet will soon give the order. So the Israeli military is eager to get this ground invasion going, and they're not happy that the government hasn't given them the order to go in. So the report said that the military has told the government that it is fully prepared for a ground offensive in the Gaza Strip and believes it can achieve the goals set out for it, even at the risk of heavy casualties to soldiers and amid ongoing attacks by Hezbollah in the north. Fire continues, across the Israel-Lebanon border. So the Israeli military, according to this report, is concerned that if Hamas releases more hostages, it would lead to a delay in the ground invasion. So they don't want Hamas to release hostages because they think then the government will say, okay, let's see how many hostages we can get released before the invasion. And they are saying that an invasion would pressure them to release the captives, but of course there's always the risk that they could be killed in the fighting. So then after I wrote this, I added to the story here that Hamas released 2 more hostages on Monday, 2 elderly women ages 79 and 85. And they put out a video of their release as well. All right, so the next one here, Israel pledges to attack Gaza like an Axis power. So this article is from The Gray Zone, written by Wyatt Reed, and it says that the Associated Press has quietly deleted a reference to official Israeli threats to subject the Gaza Strip to a Dresden-style fire bombing campaign, the latest move in legacy media outlets' ongoing push to downplay the impact of Tel Aviv's siege of over 2 million Palestinians. So this AP article previously said, before they deleted it, quote, 4 U.S. officials familiar with the discussions said American diplomats became increasingly alarmed by comments from their Israeli counterparts regarding their intention to deny water, food, medicine, electricity, fuel into Gaza, as well as the inevitability of civilian casualties. Members of the Israeli security and political establishment told the U.S. diplomats that the eradication of Hamas would require methods used in the defeat of Axis powers in World War II, end quote. So the AP originally wrote that, adding that Israeli officials have publicly made similar comparisons. So this seems like a pretty big story here, that Israel's basically saying we have to kill a lot of civilians, like you killed a lot of civilians to win World War II. That's just that, and that's a big scoop, and they deleted it, and they don't explain why. So there is a quote, they put in quotes here in this story, the Gray Zone does, from the Israeli ambassador to the UK, and she is shrugging off concerns about the thousands of innocents killed in IDF strikes on Gaza, suggesting that because Allied powers killed tens of thousands of German civilians with relentless airstrikes in the 1940s, Israel is entitled to do the same. She said, quote, there were many, many civilians that got attacked from your attacks on German cities. Dresden was a symbol, but you attacked Hamburg, you attacked other cities, and altogether it was over 600,000 civilian Germans that got killed, end quote. So basically justifying a future slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians, it sounds like, is what she's saying. And not to mention the U.S. fire bombings and the nuclear, dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan, which also killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of civilians. We don't really know the exact count. I know some estimates go up to 900,000. So really horrific stuff, and that might be a preview of what is to come in Gaza. And the airstrikes are continuing to increase. It's just really horrific stuff. And we have here the live updates on Gaza from Middle East Eye. The top story that they have is Hamas releasing these 2 hostages. It says over 2,000 children killed by Israel in 17 days. At least 28 killed by Israeli overnight strikes. So this was, Thursday night into Friday. There's just no... it's just relentless, these airstrikes. Some other updates here. China says Israel has right to self-defense, reiterates calls for a ceasefire. EU wants to revive Middle East peace. Israel says it will not delay ground invasion for hostages. That's according to their energy minister. Third convoy of aid trucks arrive in Gaza. The UN says that no fuel was delivered. Israel releases rare footage of Hamas attack and screening for journalists. Hamas's attack on southern Israel. So yeah, a lot going on still. A lot developing. All right, the next one here. Erdogan submits Sweden's NATO bid to parliament. So Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Monday submitted Sweden's NATO bid to Turkey's parliament, bringing Stockholm's entrance into the Western military one step closer. So this was announced by Erdogan's office. So Turkey and Hungary are the only 2 NATO countries that have not approved Sweden's membership. Hungary has delayed its ratification, it says, over Swedish criticism of the government of Viktor Orban. But Budapest is expected to approve Sweden's NATO bid once it's clear that Turkey will. That's kind of what they hinted at. And they did the same thing with Finland's membership. So Sweden and Finland both applied to join NATO in May 2022, but the process was delayed due to Turkey's opposition over the Nordic nations' alleged support for the PKK, which is a Kurdish militant group Turkey, the US, and the EU consider a terrorist organization. Turkey's main gripes were with Sweden, and that led Turkey to ratify Finland's membership first, which happened in March of this year. And Finland's entrance into NATO was really the big one, the more significant one, because Finland shares an over 800-mile border with Russia. But now it does seem like Sweden is going to get its membership after all. In recent weeks, Erdogan has been hinting that he might be trying to get more out of the U.S. He wants this big F-16 deal to be done that the Biden administration supports, but there's been some opposition in Congress. So I would expect to see, it sounds like they're going to ratify Sweden's membership soon, and I would expect Hungary to follow, not long behind them. All right, so the last one here is some rare good news. A bipartisan letter will urge Biden to drop the charges against Julian Assange. So Representatives Thomas Massey, he's a Republican from Kentucky in the House, and James McGovern, a House Democrat from Massachusetts, they are circulating letters in the House urging their colleagues to join them in demanding that President Biden drop the charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And this was reported by Fox News Digital. And this reporter that they have, a guy named Landon Mayon, he's really good on the Assange. He covers all the Assange stuff in pretty good detail. He was one of the only people that covered the Assange rally that I went to last year at the DOJ, and that was about a year ago in November. Didn't get any mainstream attention except from Fox News, thanks to him. So in this letter to fellow House members, Massey and McGovern asked them to join to strongly encourage the Biden administration to withdraw the U.S. extradition request currently pending against Assange and halt all prosecutorial proceedings against him as soon as possible. So Assange, who has been held in London's Belmarsh prison since April 2019, so over 4 years now, He faces up to 175 years in prison if extradited to the U.S. and convicted for exposing U.S. war crimes. He's been charged under the Espionage Act. At least 17 of the counts against him are under the Espionage Act. There's another one over some sort of computer intrusion allegation. But really what he's being charged for is publishing classified documents that he received from a source, which is a standard journalistic practice. If he can be convicted for this, so can any media outlet, any publisher. So back in April, 7 House Democrats led by Representative Rashida Tlaib sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland calling for the Justice Department to drop its pursuit of Assange, and Massey and McGovern mentioned Tlaib's effort in their letter that will be sent to President Biden once the signatures are collected. So hopefully they can get some signatures on this thing. So the bipartisan effort comes as Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in Washington and is expected to push for an end to the persecution of Assange, who is an Australian citizen. The Australian government has stepped up its lobbying efforts to secure Assange's freedom in recent months. In September, a cross-party delegation of Australian members of parliament visited Washington to press the issue. So these are all good signs here. I hope this leads to something. And I just want to read a quote from this letter that Massey and McGovern are going to send to Biden, warning about the danger to press freedom that comes with this pursuit of Julian Assange. It says, quote, "It is the duty of journalists to seek out sources, including documentary evidence, in order to report to the public on the activities of government. The United States must not pursue an unnecessary prosecution that risks criminalizing common journalistic practices and thus chilling the work of the free press. We urge you to ensure that this case be brought to a close in as timely a manner as possible," end quote. So again, good to see. I think this is something we could, write or call our House representatives and tell them to support this letter. It's going to go out Thursday. So they're going to try to get as many signatures as they can before that. Well, that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. One from Norman Solomon. Hamas is a terrorist organization. So is the Israeli government. One from Ron Paul. Biden election strategy. Let's fight 3 wars at once. One from Brett Hines. How the DC Metro is a tool for the military-industrial complex. One from Dan Steinbach. Gaza, Hamas, and the odd rule of Netanyahu's Likud. And our spotlight is from Ted Snyder. Mounting evidence that the U.S. blocked peace in Ukraine. Go check out what we got in the blog, and scroll down. We got tons of stuff on the page. But that is everything from me for today. You could always support us by sharing this show, commenting, subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, wherever you watch. If you listen to the audio version, leave a rating or a review. All that stuff really helps us out. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.